Hallo und willkommen to the Gallimaufry.
Yes, hello, and welcome back to the Gallimaufry, which was actually quite apt you were speaking German, because our first topic is a real doozy.
Yes. Thank you for joining us for our second series. I'm glad that we didn't entirely put you off. Yes, welcome back to the carpet shop.
What'd you do with your holiday?
Well, I stayed inside. I went out for my 1 hour's exercise. I stayed at least 2 meters away from other people. So, same as every year, really.
Okay.
How did you enjoy your time off, Nick?
Exactly the same thing, but all the opposite of what you said.
Yeah. So you made a point of staying at least 2 meters away from other people.
No, I made a point of staying at least right next to them.
Right next to them, like right in their face.
Yeah.
That's pretty much what you're doing right now, isn't it?
Yeah.
I can see you've been practicing. So that's
No, it was nice. I spent a lot of time reading about all the amazing things that we're going to be talking about.
Yes, so that's good. You were we released you to the wild for a little while, but now you're back within the confines of the basement, and we've got some new fascinating topics to talk about. And what better way to start than the topic we're going to be talking about today?
This is a bloody marvellous topic. Throughout the course of World War II, as we all know, there are many fascinating, inventive, grisly, and utterly absurd moments, but none more so than in the field of British intelligence, which is not a contradiction in terms, despite the present-day government.
We're getting very very political in this episode, aren't we, already? Straight off the bat.
Yeah.
Current
wow.
affairs. And yet you still won't let me do the weather forecast. It's raining. There you go.
But we haven't got a window, so you can't actually be sure of that. In fact, we can't be sure the world hasn't ended.
No, well, we didn't realise there was a pandemic till about 6 months in.
So, this episode is all about one of the most audacious spy operations ever undertaken during the war by British intelligence, and that is something aptly named Operation Mincemeat.
Yes, Operation Mincemeat, and it's not just the secret name for Nick's special recipe for spaghetti bolognese. So, just to give you some background, it's 1943, and the Allied armies are preparing an invasion of southern Europe after a relatively successful campaign in North Africa. This was no secret to the Axis powers, who were correctly expecting an attack imminently and had already begun amassing troops across their Mediterranean coastline. The question, however, was where exactly the attack would occur. Now, Churchill later claimed after the war that anybody but a damn fool would know it is Sicily. But then he would say that, wouldn't he? But nevertheless, Churchill did have a point. Sicily arguably made the most sense due to its current position as a base for attacking Allied shipping in the Mediterranean.
Can I also point out that he also said that history is written by the winners?
Do you think he might have changed his tone had he lost the war?
Yes.
Churchill, though, I mean, so you like about him, he was operating during the war, and wasn't he having a bottle of champagne every day for breakfast or something?
It's not a good thing. It's incredibly decadent.
I mean, it's impressive, though, isn't it?
I mean, is alcoholism impressive?
It depends who you ask.
Well, if you go to an AA meeting, I'm pretty sure you'll come out one-sided.
If you go to a student union, though. Churchill's drinking habits aside, he did have a point. Sicily did make a lot of sense. Unfortunately for the Allies, however, the Axis powers were not damn fools, at least not on this occasion.
Which is funny, because all the British intelligence thought they were.
Seems to be this sort of running thing with British intelligence in World War II, is just to assume everyone else is an idiot, regardless of how many times they work out what you're up to. But yes, the Axis powers had worked that out, so well done, Axis powers. And
a gold star.
Well done. Good job, you. And they had ensured that Sicily was adequately protected from enemy invasions.
That's right. The Allies had to come up with a scheme to convince Hitler and his Nazis,
Those naughty Nazis,
that they were going to invade somewhere else. So they had to invent a bogus army, and they called it Operation Barclay, which would invade the Balkans and then go into Greece and Sardinia and beyond. This was stage one of the plan. But of course, you can't just invent a bogus army. You can't just send a message saying, oh yeah, we're going to invade over there, without, a massive military build-up and planning, and the fact that there were German spies everywhere, despite the fact that half of British intelligence didn't believe they were that competent at all. So they had to come up with a plan, and that plan was Operation Mincemeat, which had its origins years back. But let's go all the way back to 1939. Oh, what a year.
Not much happened that year, did it? Bit
No,
boring.
not really.
1939.
Bit stale.
Yeah. Wizard of Oz came out.
Did it?
39, wasn't it?
Bit before my time, if I'm being honest.
Sometimes it feels like we've been down here since 1939.
It really does. Well, at the outbreak of the Second World War, there was a director of naval intelligence, and his name was Admiral John Godfrey. And all of these characters have ridiculously English names, like they are so over the top. And he basically wanted to inspire his Secret Service agents, so he wrote a particularly compelling memo. Well, if you can call it compelling. He basically wrote about trout fishing and about how you needed to throw off a load of colourful and enticing lures to catch a trout, and therefore invited his junior staff members and other departments around to come up with clever lists of ideas they could throw at the Germans to trick them or gather intelligence. And it worked. It inspired loads of his staff members to write in. In fact, there was some pretty wild ideas they pitched in. One ranged from bamboozling the Germans by dropping luminescent footballs to attract boats. The other was putting false messages in bottles that were addressed from U-boat captains expressing annoyance at Hitler to sow discontent.
What? Stupid idea.
Dropping fake copies of the Times, because, no German spy has access to the Times in London.
Of course, reading the Times makes me incredibly patriotic.
Oh, yes. And dropping explosive tins of food in the hope that a hungry, washed-up German sailor would eat it and blow up.
But,
so, some real top-drawer ideas there from the intelligence service.
This wasn't the same guy who came up with the idea to strap bombs to bats, was it, and have them fly into tanks?
Possibly. I mean, they did that in Russia with dogs.
Was it dogs?
It was kind of funny because they obviously trained the dogs to run under Russian tanks. So when they released them on the front, they just ran under the Russian tanks. But one of the ideas on that list was item number 28, which basically, I'm paraphrasing here, but it was like, I once read that there was a detective novel where they dropped a corpse disguised as an officer carrying some important documents. And this would become the basis for Operation Mincemeat.
You really get the impression this guy, he'd been told to write the report, and he'd really rather have just gone fishing. So it's just the epitome of phoning it in.
It definitely is. What's funny, though, is his direct number 2 was a pretty famous author, and he was called Ian Fleming. And, of course, he wrote the world-famous Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, and some spy stuff as well. Yeah. But it's mainly Chitty Chitty Bang Bang that he's well known for. And this idea appealed to him as well, and it's one that sort of stuck in the minds of British intelligence, and it wouldn't go away, because the weird thing about working in British intelligence, or indeed any intelligence spy service, is that everyone loves detective novels, and everyone fancies themselves a bit of a writer. In fact, most of the general staff in the British intelligence went on to write novels. So if you do want to go into the publishing world, you just have to become a spy first. It's the easiest route to it, apparently.
There we go. That's some good advice there.
It is some good advice.
And people say we never say anything useful on this podcast.
What people? Have we had people write in?
Well, they don't write in. They just sort of shout at us across the street.
That's just your neighbours.
Oh, right.
So, this idea was firmly entrenched in the British intelligence mind, and it was particularly entrenched in the mind of one Charles Christopher Chumley. He was actually an Air Force flight lieutenant, and he was intelligent, he was ambitious, he was over 6'3" with size 12 feet, and he loved in his spare time to restore antique cars, study the mating of insects, a bit saucy, and shoot birds.
But presumably he was only known as Chumley because they thought Biggles might be a bit on the nose.
Possibly. But he worked for something called the 20 Committee, which is part of the Admiralty. And they were responsible for a number of different espionage operations, but also for managing double agents and creating double agent networks, bogus ones, real ones, things like that. And he presented the idea of using a corpse containing documents to throw the Germans off the scent. And it was a winner. The intelligence staff immediately latched onto it, and they began to put it into motion.
Interesting point about the 20 Committee. Their name came from the Roman numeral for 20, XX, or double cross. So these guys didn't get picked up by British intelligence for nothing,
Both sides were very guilty of having less than cryptic vaguely funny names for different things. So apparently the Nazis used to have a long-range radar system which was named Heimdall after the Norse god with the power to see very far away. And this is kind of where the name Operation Mincemeat comes from, because it involves the use of a corpse. And so Chumley presented the idea of using a corpse to trick the Germans into believing false intelligence, because not only was this idea already embedded in British intelligence, less than a month before he presented the idea, in September 1942, an English seaplane had crashed near Cadiz in Spain, which was carrying orders for the dates of invasion in North Africa. And this was unfortunate because this was not only a German sympathetic country, although technically Spain were neutral, but it was also a hotbed of German spies. It's not really where you want to crash. But miraculously, the Spanish returned the body and the various documents the man was carrying, and they discovered that the Spanish were true to their word. They hadn't actually opened the documents the man was carrying. However, unfortunately, also travelling with the British airmen was a French soldier with a notebook with very similar information on it, which wasn't sealed, and they read that and passed that to the Germans.
The way they knew the document hadn't been opened is when they sealed it, they put an eyelash on it. And when they opened it again, they realised the eyelash was still there.
But thankfully, the Germans didn't actually value it. They thought it was a ruse. But it presented an important point to the British. It presented the point that the Spanish would not maintain their neutrality when given the chance. Chumley's idea went down like a very nice sirloin steak with lots of the higher-ups. So he was assigned a partner to help him plan it. His name was Ewan Montagu. He had a very colourful past and an even more colourful brother, because his brother was called Ivor Montagu. Now, if anyone's a fan of what Boris Johnson calls wiffle bat, which we know as ping pong or table tennis, Ivor Montagu is considered the founder of ping pong. He also set up the Cheese Eaters League, where they would sample expensive and exotic cheese. So, a traditional working class sport right there.
He was also a barrister before the war as a civilian.
This is Ivor, not Ewan.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh.
Ivor we could do a podcast about him alone. He was absolutely mental, and he later turned out to be a Russian spy because he loved the Soviet Union and ended up actually producing a lot of films in America and was best friends with Charlie Chaplin.
Maybe we should be doing an episode about Ivor, not Ewan. What are we wasting our time with this guy for?
But anyway, Ewan was he was the boring brother, I suppose. Mm-hmm. Yeah, he was a lawyer, but he was very passionate about wanting to help British intelligence because he was a little too old to serve in World War II. Yes, he was incredibly intelligent. He was actually very charismatic as well, and he had his own team, which he called 17M, later named Section 12, which dealt with all intelligence regarding the Navy, and they had oversight of every single facet of British intelligence. And he basically employed an eclectic mix of school teachers, handymen, anyone who actually was intelligent. So you have this interesting double act of this suave, charismatic, intelligent, rich aristocrat and this slightly awkward, tall, also very fiercely intelligent, but more sort of a bit socially awkward fellow, combining to create this operation. And don't start comparing them to us.
I was just going to say,
I could see it in your eyes.
It sounds very familiar, these pair,
Oh, really? Which one are you?
You're the British officer who'd really rather be going trout fishing.
I'm Godfrey.
Writing a detective novel.
No, well, that's probably... I mean, the second part's probably... I have been trout fishing, actually.
Yeah? How's the detective novel coming along?
It's about halfway done, actually. Yeah. Oh, God. Anyway, so they came together and began to enact the plan. Now, you would have thought, during the middle of war, finding a corpse to act as a fake British officer would be a very easy job. But it actually proves to be quite complicated. So they sought out the help of the forensic pathologist of his day, an incredibly arrogant man called Sir Bernard Spilsbury.
Spilsbury, he is an interesting one, and I'm sure infuriating if you had to spend any time with him.
And he was a bit of a celebrity. He was the doctor who helped send down Dr. Crippen.
He was also partly responsible for the development of the murder bag, which Scotland Yard now use on murder scenes. Spilsbury
probably also sent about over 100 men to their deaths, and not all of which were probably guilty. But he was very much as soon as he made his mind up, that was it. He wasn't going to change it. It didn't matter what you threw at him.
Yes. He had a reputation for being a brilliant pathologist, being a infuriating human being, and being a slightly unsettling expert in the field of death.
Lovely.
Yes.
So yes. Anyway, he advised what sort of corpse that Cholmondeley and Montagu should search for, because obviously a lot of the corpses they were turning up were bomb damaged, or they'd been shot or stabbed, or they hadn't died in the right way. It would undergo a rigorous autopsy to figure out whether it was a real thing or not. So he advised them on what corpse they needed to find, and then they went to the foremost coroner of the time. Another incredibly English-sounding name, Mr. Bentley Purchase.
Oh, Mr. Bentley Purchase,
who was actually quite a contrast to Spilsbury, because he was actually, if he was a coroner, he was quite cheerful. I think I'd want my coroner to be quite cheerful, if I'm honest.
Disappointingly, Mr. Bentley Purchase did not have a lucrative career in selling luxury cars, though.
No,
but rather he's just the head coroner at St Pancras Hospital, which is not quite as much fun. Luckily, he put the skills which he should really have been putting towards finding fine automobiles, putting them to use finding just the right corpse for a secret mission into enemy territory.
So Mr. Bentley Purchase was quite important because he used to come across all sorts of corpses. In fact, he dealt with a lot of suicide cases because he was based in London. And one of the slightly morbid, interesting, and depressing facts I came across during my reading was that London, a quarter of all suicides that they found were people that weren't from London. So people were literally coming to top themselves in London.
Oh, do we know the reason for that?
Have you seen London?
I don't think I want that to be my last sight, though. I'm not going to spoil somewhere nice with this. Let's just go to London.
And he thought that this could be a quite fertile ground for finding a potential corpse, because a lot of people top themselves through poisoning, and poison tends to naturally sort of dissipate from the system after a few days, and sometimes you can't even tell what poisons have been used. And this is where I don't know how to describe him, our heroic,
tragic, unwilling hero
cadaver appears. Yes, he was a young Welshman, and I'd like you to pronounce his name for me.
Okay, this is the first mispronunciation of the series. If you're playing mispronunciation bingo at home, we're going to go with Glendower Michael.
Yeah, I go with that.
Glendower Michael.
Glendower?
Let's go with Glendower.
I'm going to call him Glyn, just for ease.
Glyn's good. I can pronounce that.
Or Michael, you could just call him Michael.
Mr. Michael. He won't be known for Glyn or Michael for most of this story, though.
Just to give you a bit of backstory on him, because he's a person and he needs his story told like anyone else. He was born in a town. He was born in a town called. He was born in a town near Cardiff.
Very smoothly done there. Yes, and you get no points for that one.
I mean, I'll have Aberbarguo.
That sure, Aberbarguo.
In 1909, and
you could have just made something up.
I could have, but
who's going to check this?
Wow, that's the thing, really, isn't it?
He was born in Barry.
We shouldn't be like, because his life was tragic.
Yes.
He was born into immense poverty.
Yes.
To a family with a long history of illness. They actually genetically passed on congenital syphilis. So his father was a bit raving mad from the syphilis and ended up stabbing himself in the throat when Glenn was just 16 years old, just before Christmas. So, Glenn had watched his father waste away for no money at all, working down the mines, and then end up trying to kill himself. And he had brothers and sisters, but they all kind of moved away and married and got out of the sort of hovel that they were living in. And then his mother died in 1940 of a heart attack. So, he'd been trying to keep her alive, support her for a few years with various little odd jobs, but finding work was difficult. And obviously he was starting to deteriorate from the syphilis he had. When his mother died in 1940, he didn't really have anything left. He didn't really have a house. So he buried her and ended up travelling to London, I guess, in search of a better life. And then he obviously spent a few years there before he wound up dead.
Yeah, he was. His body was found in a warehouse near King's Cross, where he'd eaten rat poison and died from it.
But the sad thing is, it might not have actually been suicide.
No, he might have just been scrounging for food, and he just happened to find something that had been laced with poison. However, his body was brought to St Pancras Hospital, where Dr. Bentley Purchase was the coroner, as we said, and he saw this as an ideal candidate for Operation Mincemeat. And obviously, they got Bernard Spilsbury to take a look, and he felt that at the time they were planning on possibly staging an air crash in the sea, and he felt that this body could feasibly be made to look like it had died in an air crash at sea.
He also determined that it would take a skilled microchemist to accurately determine that this person had died of ingesting rat poison, and confidently declared that no such person existed in Spain, ignoring the fact that there were, dozens of competent medical practitioners in Spain that could easily do that.
Yeah, I like to think at this point they were just brushing off these comments. By all accounts, he was a bit of an arse. But never mind, his job was done. The next challenge would be to take a homeless man full of rat poison and turn him into a respected military officer. Just the kind of guy you'd entrust with the plans for your impending attack. And this is where we meet Captain William Martin.
Montague and Cholmondeley both set about creating a very impressive and very creative backstory for this new captain. One of the most interesting things, though, is they had to use a real person's name. One of the first things they had to work out was, who would be carrying these orders? What department would he be part of? Because that's a crucial thing, because, a generic army soldier would not be carrying this. A member of naval intelligence would have to be dressed in a certain way, might not even be on an aircraft like that, or travelling anywhere near Africa. So they settled on him being a serving Royal Marine. Now, the problem with that was that the Germans knew every serving Royal Marine, because it was quite a small unit. So they had to go through the names, and by chance they came across Captain William Hind Norrie Martin, who was actually serving in America in Rhode Island, teaching people various different survival tricks. But he was officially posted to a ship called the Hermes, which had been sunk by the Japanese in 1942. This meant they could post a death notice in the papers when the body did appear, and the real Norris wouldn't know because he'd be in Rhode Island, and his friends back home would think he's dead because they still thought he was on the ship that went down. So this dead man kind of took on the identity of someone who was still living, but was completely different in every single way. They built up a completely new backstory for him. It was really ridiculous, the amount of detail they went into.
So as well as this identity of William Martin, the corpse would also be equipped with various items which would reinforce his backstory. These were known as pocket litter. These included a receipt for an engagement ring, a note from a family solicitor, a book of stamps, cigarettes, receipts, and a St. Christopher's medallion. It was hoped that, being that Spain was a Catholic country at the time, that if they saw that this body was also Catholic, that they wouldn't be as invasive when they performed the autopsy on it.
They also made him smart, charming, a lover of the theatre, had a good upbringing in Wales, and was a bit lax with remembering key details, and a bit of a forgetful type of individual. So much to the point that Montague actually got the joint manager of Lloyd's Bank, who at the time was a man called Ernest Whitley Jones, another very English name.
Did he write detective novels?
No, he didn't. To write a very angry letter to him about an overdraft that he still hadn't paid. They really got deep down into the character development. They even gave him a niece who had a slightly inappropriate crush on him.
Yeah, they gave him letters from his pompous and pedantic father, and love letters from his fiancée, who was called Pam.
Yes, and now Pam's interesting because Pam, there was a genuine photo of a real person, of one of the members of British intelligence, whose name was Joan Leslie.
Yes, so in order to reinforce his relationship to his fiancée Pam, MI5 decided to hold a sort of morbid 1940s edition of The Bachelor, using the women who are currently working in the department.
But funny enough, and by sheer strange coincidence, all of the women working for British intelligence just happened to be incredibly attractive. Well, I wonder how that happened.
Yes, so we begin to see another side of Montague here. Allegedly, he had a bit of a thing for Jean, and he'd actually intended that she was going to win it all along. I'm sure we've done weirder things to try and impress girls.
Well, he was married to a wonderful lady named Iris. She was based in America while he was based back in the UK. He actually informed her that he was going to ask Jean out on a date, so he wasn't particularly shy about his urges. But yes, they they planted very fake love letters, and they built up a whole backstory that he'd only met Pam 5 weeks before he'd flown out on this ill-fated flight. In fact, they got paranoid about the weirdest things. So the picture of Pam is actually a picture of Jean at a beach wearing a very I guess it was actually quite saucy for the time. She was wearing a patented one-piece swimsuit.
Did Montague request that specifically?
He actually asked her to request all other copies of that photograph be destroyed, lest any German spy get wind that someone had it. So she had to send a letter to an ex-partner saying, you need to destroy that photograph, which I must imagine was quite sad for the for the man, because she couldn't tell him why.
No.
In fact, she didn't really fully know why this was happening either, because this was all incredibly top secret. Only really Montague, Cholmondeley, and the very, very top brass of Godfrey and another man called Bevan, who was in charge of he was the sort of controller of intelligence and was very close to Churchill. And funny enough, did not get on with Montague. Montague and him hated each other. So they had all this focus on these minor details, but there were a lot of things that just didn't make sense about the whole process. Like, this was a man who had gone over on his overdraft, but was paying everything in cash, which he wouldn't have had. He would have just paid checks for everything. That was something the Germans would have picked out. Addresses and names linked to him with telephone numbers. If a German had just rung up Pam's address, no one there would ever have been known to have lived there called Pam. So there were a lot of big holes in their stories, but they were so confident that this would succeed, and so confident in the ineptitude of their opponents that they didn't think about these big things got missed. In fact, Montague used to ride around on a bicycle carrying the nation's most top secret documents. It's a bit like, the Chancellor just having a stroll with the big red briefcase round Soho on a Friday evening. It's just like they were just so arrogantly confident. It was incredible.
I think it's little things like that make this story just sort of so much more interesting, though. It's sort of the human factor of it.
But one of the key pieces of fiction, aside from all the little pocket litter, as you said, of the little things he's carrying, was the actual document he was supposed to be carrying, detailing the fake invasion plans. Now, this was a source of massive conflict within British intelligence, because Montague wrote the original letter that was detailing the bits of information. And he wrote it as like a chummy letter between two of the top serving generals at the time. So that was General Archibald Nye of the Imperial Staff, and he was supposed to be writing a letter to General Sir Harrod Alexander in Tunisia. So the idea is that this was a plane en route to Tunisia which had crashed, and obviously the courts would then wash up in Spain. And Montague wrote this letter and thought it was God's gift to the world. He loved it. He thought, there's nothing wrong with this. Let's send this off. And so he gave it to his superiors, and they were like, you can't send this. And it got rewritten countless times, and everyone debated it back and forth. And it led to a massive bust-up between him and Bevan. And eventually they just got General Nye to write it.
To which Montague declared it to be quite brilliant. But then he probably would say that if his approach to career progression was anything like his attempts to impress women.
Yeah. But of course, General Nye had none of the flair or humour that Montague had, but at least it was believable. I like the fact that they spent ages writing this letter and no one ever thought to say, should we just ask the general to do it? Because he's real. Why doesn't he do it? And then alongside this letter were a couple of other letters explaining the presence of this soldier in the first place, like he was seconded to an amphibious assault division in Tunisia.
They deliberately made this letter seem to be like unofficial correspondence to explain why it wasn't being delivered through the official channels.
That's right. I mean, that was Montague's original idea. He wanted it to be a sort of chumly feel about it.
I see what you did there. Chumly.
Yes. Chum. I mean, I was actually supposed to be saying chummy, but for some reason it came out chumly. Just roll with it. Okay.
Just go with it.
Yeah.
Chumly. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and to be fair, Nye, and I mean, Nye was a very to the point man, but he wrote it to his best ability in that sort of like friendly manner by calling his colleague Jumbo continuously. So
of course he's called Jumbo.
Yes.
Of course he is. He runs with this crowd. He's running with Cholmondeley and Montague and Spilsbury and Bernard.
But no, it's Bentley Purchase.
Of course, yes. Of course, his name is Jumbo. Right.
That's okay. Now they had the letters, they had the body. They'd given the body another reason why he was actually chosen to be a Royal Marine was because they came in standard uniform sizes. So originally they wanted to make him a naval officer, but then they realised they'd had to get a tailor in to measure up a corpse, which would have been quite difficult to explain. So they dressed him up. Oh, and that's one of the other funny things is Cholmondeley had to wear in the uniform. He was a similar size to Glendower. So he basically wore this man's clothes and then put them on the corpse, which must have been a very peculiar thing. Yes. So you have Montague writing this immense backstory, writing love letters to Pam, which were actually probably love letters to Jean as well. So he was kind of living this man's life.
Mm.
And then you had Chumley walking around in his clothes.
It must have been very surreal.
Yeah.
Montague and Chumley, they actually had intended to include several pieces of photographic ID to add some credibility. However, they had trouble photographing Glendower. They couldn't make him not look like a corpse.
Yeah.
So try picturing that for a moment if you ever think you've had a rough day at work.
The funny thing was that Montague then went around London just looking for people that looked remotely like him. Just going up to people and just eyeballing them. And eventually they found someone who looked a bit similar and got him to pose for a bit of cash.
Sometimes you think it's a wonder these people won the war.
It is, yeah. Of course, now they had everything. They had the body, they had the documents. They needed a way to actually get the body there. They went through a number of different scenarios, dropping it out of a plane, which they quickly ruled out because then the body would be smashed to bits, tipping them overboard on a boat. And so in the end, they settled on a submarine. And they went with the HMS Seraph, which was due to be on manoeuvres in the Mediterranean around mid-April, which is when they wanted to release the information, because they were on a very pressing deadline. The invasion of Sicily was scheduled for July, so they had to get this operation in motion very quickly because obviously it takes time to move troops, so they wanted the Germans to reposition all their troops in the areas they were going to have this bogus attack. And this was in dock up at Scotland. But the biggest thing was, as we've said, it's a corpse. It's already a few weeks to a month old. It's obviously going to decompose really quickly. So they enlisted the help of Charles Fraser Smith. He furnished the spies with gadgets, very much like Q in James Bond. So he basically was Q. He was also an inventor of garlic-flavoured chocolate, which they would give to spies parachuting into France because they thought it was more authentic if they smelt like garlic.
Was everybody in World War II some aristocratic eccentric?
Who was a bit racist and mad.
Yeah.
Yes, of course. This is England. But anyway, his next great invention was the world's first underwater corpse transporter.
Of course
I don't know if it's the very last, but it's certainly the first.
You hope it's the last.
Yes. Which was essentially a 6 foot 6 inches long, 2 feet wide metal canister with a hatch at the front and sealed with asbestos and dry ice.
Right. So they've got their vacuum sealed corpse. One thing, when they were getting William Martin dressed up for his mission, they actually struggled to get his boots on. So they had to warm them up with an electric fire. So maybe just think about that for a moment.
I mean, it's just so surreal thinking about it. These two men created this other man, and then they're playing with him like a doll, dressing him up. It's just very odd.
Yeah, I mean, you do really feel for Glendower. It's like he had a rough life, and even in death he couldn't get a break.
At least he found some purpose. I guess that's the only thing you can take from it.
Yeah, he was very useful, I suppose. But yes, he's in his canister. So now they need to get him up to where the submarine is in Scotland. So in the early hours of the 17th of April 1943, the canister is loaded into a 1937 Fordson van, along with Chumley and Montague. The van was then driven to Scotland by, obviously, an ex-racing champion and now MI5 agent called St. John Jock Horsfall.
Oh my God.
Because who else would you get to drive the van?
I'm starting to think that maybe James Bond wasn't as ridiculous as I thought it was.
This is like getting Damon Hill to drive agents around.
I mean, what happened to Damon Hill?
Damon Hill?
Is he still alive?
I think he runs a charity now.
Yeah.
Or,
in public, but on the side, he's driving corpses around.
We are showing our age a bit here. Okay, Lewis Hamilton.
It's not a retirement plan that you really envy, do you?
No. Yes. So they bring the corpse to Scotland, and they load it aboard the HMS Seraph.
Yes. And so on the 19th of April, the HMS Seraph, captained by Captain Jewell, set sail and arrived just off the coast of Huelva. Huelva?
Oh, that's number 3.
Oh, it's number 3.
Yes.
Is that how you say it?
That's
how Google told me to say it, so that's what I'm sticking with.
Well, let's go with that then.
Huelva in Spain.
I think it's egg is huevo, isn't it? So maybe it's Huelva.
I don't I don't think it's different word. Yeah. And whoever was chosen, because it was the place where German influence was strongest along the coast. And it also happened to be the home of a massive German spy network headed by Adolf Klaus, a German expat who was very much a big fan of gardening.
I like that. The eccentricities of the British are like, oh, they want to be a detective writer. Oh, they invented chocolate garlic. This guy, he liked gardening. That's a nice change of pace there.
It's just not as exciting. You can see why the English won the war. They're mad.
They've just got all the nutters out.
And Klaus would actually come to play an important role when the body did eventually get released and washed up, because he would be the one to point out the importance of it. This is why whoever was chosen. They arrived off the coast of it on the 29th of April at around 4 a.m. in the morning, after having been bombed twice en route. So they got there in the end.
This is just such an absurd story that them being bombed twice is it's a footnote, really, isn't it? Yeah. Let's not go. They were bombed twice. That's all you need to know.
Well, people made of sterner stuff in old days. You know, if you crack your iPhone today, it's like you lose a leg.
Yeah, obviously.
Yeah. Kids these days. No gumption and spirit, eh?
Not like Damon Hill.
So yes, they arrived on the 29th of April, and then they spent some time reconnoitring the area. And around 4:15 a.m., they surfaced, and the crew took the body out of its coffin and released it into the water.
They released Captain William Martin into the ocean. I think the captain of the submarine read a psalm, and then the submarine, it turned around, it sailed away, and the engines sort of pushed Captain Martin towards the shore.
I mean, he's already travelled quite a long way. He's travelled from Wales to London, and now he's ended up in Huelva.
This man has travelled further in death than he ever did in life.
It's really depressing, but yeah. And so on an overcast April morning, a Spanish fisherman by the name of Jose Antonio Rey Maria, who was employed... Yeah, that was a good one.
That was good.
That was a good one. Who was employed as a sardine spotter, rode upon a very peculiar and perhaps unpleasant sight. I'm paraphrasing from a wonderful book here which tells this story. And that just happened to be the corpse of Major William Martin. And so, he decided it was probably his duty to get the body out of the water and take it back to shore because it's a person. So he did that. He rowed it back. Obviously, all the villagers gathered around. But luckily for him, the 72nd Spanish Regiment happened to be marching past and said, we'll take that. And it got carried to the closest village on the back of a donkey.
It's really not getting any better for him, is it?
No, it's really not. And then Jose, after doing his duty as a human being, went back out to get more fish. And this is where it gets quite interesting, because basically the Spanish didn't really see the importance of this corpse that just washed up on their beach with this briefcase handcuffed to him, which contained all these important letters. That's something we didn't actually mention. They put it all into a briefcase because that's how they thought it would preserve in the water the best. This is where Klaus comes in and says, look, you need to release the body to us. You need to let us know what this guy's carrying. The Spanish weren't particularly forthcoming because Spain was neutral, but there were different dissenting voices within Spain, although they were vastly pro-German. There was actually a bunch of English-based Gibraltar officers that were trying to sort of influence different sections of the Spanish military, including the Navy. So the Navy were not as receptive to the Germans as perhaps the mainland forces were, and they sent the body to Madrid.
So the plan, so far, was going pretty well.
When they were doing the autopsy of Glenn/Bill Martin, the vice-consul for the English, called Hazelden, was present to prevent them from doing too particularly an in-depth autopsy. He offered them a spot of lunch, so they wrapped up quite quickly.
Again, just to stress the sort of absurdity of this story, had the Spanish been more vigorous with their autopsy, they would have seen these issues that you raised earlier about, the backstory that they're trying to convey with this. It's only the fact that they were convinced to go to lunch early that they were able just to overlook those stuff and go, oh yeah, he probably drowned at sea. It could have gone so wrong had they been a bit more,
But it was the Spanish and they didn't care. And the important thing was that the Germans ended up getting their hands on the documents after kicking up a huge fuss about it and getting their Admiral Wilhelm Canaris, who is the head of the German network called the Abwehr, to actually get the documents sent to Germany. So the Spanish ended up agreeing, and they opened up the briefcase, opened up all the contents of the letters, photographed them, and then carefully put them back in, resealed them, and sent them back to the British.
Yeah. So the British, expecting a response, they leapt into action and they started issuing a series of pre-scripted messages between the Admiralty, stressing the importance of this briefcase and how it must be retrieved, and it's very, very important, and nobody else should look at it. Now, they knew that the Germans were intercepting these messages, but the Germans didn't know that the British knew that they were intercepting the messages. It's clever, right?
It's very clever. And of course, when the documents were returned to Hazelden, who sent them back to Britain, tests were done back home, and it was determined that the Spanish had opened the documents, they had tampered with them, and it was clear that they had obviously been read, or, the information was passed on.
I believe at this point that they pass a coded message to say, mincemeat swallowed. Yes, so by this point, Glendower Michael, he'd done his job, and his body was buried in Huelva with full military honours, which is sort of a fittingly bizarre end to this weird posthumous adventure he's had.
And of course, he didn't die in vain, because everyone bought it. The Germans, particularly Hitler, with his paranoid, domineering personality, was absolutely convinced now that the British and the Allies and the Americans would invade Sardinia and Greece through the Balkans. In fact, they were so utterly convinced, when the actual attack of Sicily occurred on the 9th of July, they were still sending planes from Sicily to be stationed near the Balkans, even though Sicily was currently under attack. The actual invasion of Sicily took around just over a month, because there was a force of 65,000 troops on Sicily, and they held off 400,000 American and British troops for a fair old lick. But the casualties were absolutely minimal for the British. The British had expected around 10 to 20,000 killed. Only a seventh of that became casualties, and they lost 12 ships compared to the 300 to 500 they were expecting to lose. You could say it was a massive success, and also caused, most importantly, the fall of Mussolini, because on the 25th of July he was stripped of all his powers and imprisoned.
I think, though, in the face of it, Operation Mincemeat does look like this sort of masterstroke of espionage, but really, I think a lot of it came down to the German cock-ups being bigger than the British cock-ups.
Well, there are lots of different historians who suggest that the British Operation Barclay, which Operation Mincemeat was sort of attached to, was already sending messages about the Balkans being a staging site for a bogus invasion. So they suggest that coupled with Hitler's obsession with the Balkans, already lean things towards the idea that Sicily was not going to be the basis for the attack. As we mentioned, it was a success in the sense that the Germans believed that it was a British agent, so the operation succeeded. How much bearing that actually had on the invasion of Sicily is up for debate, but either way, it's an amazing story.
So, before we go, why don't we discuss some interesting things that we came up with?
So, previously in the last series, we would go through an interesting fact or a myth, and we now chose to sort of just mix that together into just an interesting point or an interesting misbelief, because it proved bloody hard to keep finding myths about everything.
A myth and an interesting fact. That's asking too much.
But anyway, yes. What did you come across that you found particularly interesting or unbelievable or downright mad?
So we mentioned that the inspiration for this came from the Trout Memo. So the item in the Trout Memo, which was used as inspiration, was titled "A Suggestion," and then in brackets, "Not a very nice one." And this one was itself inspired by a 1936 novel by a man called Basil Thompson, and he was an author known for his detective stories. And this novel, the plot of this novel involved a dead body, which was found in a barn with no identifying characteristics other than the objects found alongside it. That's it. It's not a great one.
I thought that was
it's like, you're writing, oh yeah, interesting fact, and then you read it after going through the whole story, and you go, this is really underwhelming because it's nowhere near as interesting as some of the other stuff we've talked about.
That's because they're all mad.
They are all mad. It's just, there's so many interesting things in this story that it's hard to pick out one that is surprising after all of that.
And the amount of characters we've not even mentioned.
So what have you got, Nick?
So mine, the actual act of taking a dead body, planting evidence on it, and then throwing it into the enemy, it actually has an official name, and that name is the haversack ruse. And a haversack, if anyone doesn't know, is basically a small single-strap shoulder bag. It's conjured up by this guy called... he's probably the one British officer that doesn't have a very English name.
Dave. Officer Dave.
No, he's still called Richard.
Okay.
So,
okay,
Dickie. Dickie, Richard.
Oh, of course.
But his last name is Minor Erzhagen. But he was a British spy / ornithologist.
Of course he was an ornithologist.
/
Of course he was. Couldn't be into trout fishing, could he? So he had to be into birds.
/ anti-Semitic Zionist. He was once described by...
Wait, an anti-Semitic Zionist?
People are weird about how they hate. I don't know. But anyway, he was once described by Lawrence of Arabia as extraordinarily nasty. So he's quite a piece of work. And during World War I, he came up with a plan of stuffing a haversack with false documents, letters, and a bunch of cash, really. Smeared himself with the blood of his horse, rode out towards the enemy, and let them fire upon him. So it's quite a risky plan.
Was the horse blood for?
To make it look like his horse had been hit by bullet fire.
Right.
So
that wasn't just his thing.
No. He covered the sack in it as well, so it looked like it had come off when they were shooting at him.
Oh, okay.
So he threw the sack on the ground, and then rode back. And then they put out loads of messages saying, "Where is my sack? I want my sack back. It's really important we get our sack back." And the Turks bought it, and they moved their troops, and the British attacked where the line was weakest, and took Jerusalem in a few months. Like with Operation Mincemeat, a lot of historians dispute how successful this act of espionage actually was, but it's gone down in folklore.
Where's my sack? Good.
A slightly less profitable version of Where's My Car?
Yes, dude, where's my sack?
And on that note, what delightful topic are we going to be discussing next week?
Well, in an exciting change of pace, owing to listener feedback, we're now going to start at the end of the episode. We're going to give you a little clue as to what we're going to be talking about next time. And you'll have 2 weeks, and you can try and figure out what it's going to be. Yes. So please do subscribe. Keep listening. Let us know what you think. We're always really interested to hear feedback.
Only if it's good, though.
Only if it's good. If it's bad,
jog on.
Yeah, go away. We don't care. No, we like constructive criticism.
You do. I don't.
I do. You don't. That's why you don't read the emails.
You don't let me read the emails.
No.
You don't let me leave the room.
No, you will stay in the basement. So, Nick, why don't you play the clue for next week?
I will, and thank you for joining us. It's been amazing.
3, 2, 1, 0.
The Earth is a very small stage in a vast cosmic arena.
Do you think your little speck in the galaxy is the only one with intelligent life? Yes.
If you're an alien first coming upon our solar system, Earth would be barely noticed by you. You'll notice Saturn, you'll notice Jupiter, and you'll say, what are these balls of rock orbiting closer to the sun?